It is so lovely to have all of you here today on this wonderful Wednesday. We've almost made it through another week in 2020, which is an accomplishment all in itself. And so I'm super happy to have everyone here today. As you're joining, let us know where you're calling in from and how you're doing as we're approaching the end of the year. And before we get kicked off today, I just want to go over a couple of housekeeping items. So, please feel free to turn your cameras on, come off of mute, and really participate and engage in this conversation. It's really about you. We want to make sure that you're getting the most out of this time. And the best way to get the most out of this time is really to drop your questions in the chat or, participate in whichever way you feel comfortable. So with that, should you feel comfortable, come off of mute, like I said, or write in the chat. And if you would rather ask something privately and keep it anonymous, please feel free to send me a private message by going to the chat box, hitting the drop-down menu and finding my name, Nicole Felter. And with that, this conversation is being recorded. So we will send you an email afterwards with a link to come back and take any notes that you want. But we really just want you to be present in the now, in the here with us. And finally, keep up with us on social. You can find us at Power to Fly on all social channels. And you should definitely subscribe to our YouTube channel where we are live streaming all of these conversations and where we have all of our previous chat and learns. And so with that, I am so excited to have today's guest on this conversation because she is incredible and I feel very honored to be here. And not only is she going to talk about an amazing conversation, but her background is amazing. And so Chantita Dayton is the founder and CEO of Llewellyn, a premium hemp-derived CBD company launched in 2020. Previously, Dayton was a founder of CEO of Equality Beauty, a beauty mask customization technology company, which was acquired in 2017. And Dayton has also held positions at Louis Vuitton, Limited Brands, and Oliver Wyman Consulting. She holds a BA from Harvard University and an MBA from Stanford University. She is a mother of 2 daughters and lives in Brooklyn. And I know I skipped a bit of your background, Chantita, but I wanted to leave some for you to talk about. And so I want to hand the mic over to you and, tell us a little bit more about you and why you're excited to be here today to talk about such an amazing conversation topic.
Yeah, well, thank you, Nicole, and thanks everyone for joining. It's really an honor to have you all here. As Nicole and I were brainstorming about what we could talk about, one of the themes that came up as I was telling her my story was just the number of times that a sort of seemingly coincidental conversation or a chance meeting or what have you kind of led to something serendipitous happening. And as we connected the dots, we realized that there was actually a bit of a theme there, which is that you can really kind of make some serendipity happen for yourself. And a lot of it comes through leveraging your network, in my experience. So I thought, I could maybe tell you guys my story a little bit and then share a couple of tips that I have in terms of, how to kind of grow the power of your network and your joy from your network as well. So with that, Nicole, should I tell a little bit about my background?
Yes, please do. Please do.
Okay. So I was born in India. When I was about 2 years old, my parents got divorced, which just didn't really happen in India in the 80s. And my mom moved as a single mom to the States. And 6 months later, I moved over with my grandparents. And I think I was in like the first grade when my mom said, like, you need to go to Harvard. She was like the original tiger mom. I mean, like, anyway, so from an early age, I had this instilled in my head that, education was really important and sort of going to these brand name institutions was very important. And I'm going to tell you guys some like random details from childhood. So in 5th grade, my teacher took me outside and like told me something and handed me this piece of paper. Take this home. It's something your parents need to look at. And I can't think of the number of times like you had been given like a permission slip or something that I forgot to bring home. But for some reason, I did bring this piece of paper home. And it was a flyer for this organization called Prep for Prep that helped students of color go into independent schools. So I brought that home to my mom, eventually took the test, was in this Prep for Prep program. I was now 10 years old, for 2 years. And through that earned a scholarship to go to Harrisman, which is this really prestigious dependent school in New York. And my senior year, I did get into Harvard, just to so fulfilling my mom's dream there. But my senior year, I applied through the internship program there for an internship at Solomon Smith Barney. And I'm going to leave that there and I'll come back to it later. I made some friends there, including a girl named Jen, who I went to college with, but I'll circle back to that later. Anyway, started my career after college in management consulting, and started my MBA in 2007 at Stanford. My goal going into the MBA was to make a career shift out of consulting and into something consumer. And we had to write an essay as we were applying called What Matters Most to You and Why. And I wrote about living a life where I could make decisions free of fear, because so much of kind of the immigrant experience, I think, at least in the 80s, felt like very much like a risk reduction and trying to avoid like the scary stuff, right? So my goal coming out of my MBA was to feel like more purposeful in the choices I could make. And I wrote about wanting to work at a luxury company and then move into a business of my own. So I ended up getting an internship at Limited Brands, which is a holding company for Victoria's Secret, Bath and Body Works. And some people in the internship program got really cool internships where they got to like work on developing new makeup products and this and that. I got stuck in the group that was like the ex-consultants group. And I was like, oh man. But what ended up happening was my boss in that group ended up running the whole internship program. And at the end of the summer, he called us in and said that he was leaving Limited and was actually going to go be the head of retail at Louis Vuitton. Now, this is 2008. So obviously financial crisis, really good time to graduate from any school. But because of that relationship with him, I was able to get a job at Louis Vuitton coming out of my MBA, which had sort of been like the dream company I'd had in mind when I was writing that essay about, living free of fear. A year in over there, I was having a bit of a tough time. They had a program where you were working in the retail store. So we can definitely talk more about that later if you're interested. Very humbling experience, learned a ton, but there wasn't a great kind of pathway from moving into the types of role I wanted. So I decided to get randomly, I had coffee with my friend Jen from the internship from senior year at Solomon Smith Barney. And Jen had started a company 6 months prior, and that day at lunch made me an offer to join the company. And that company was Rent the Runway. And the next week, I quit my job at Vuitton, and the week after I started at Rent the Runway. And I was, one of the first 20 employees and stayed there for the next 4 years and went on to run business development there. And learned a lot about kind of networking there because I ran our business development partnerships group for several years. I then went on to head up Lyst, which is an e-commerce fashion marketplace, often confused with Lyft, but no, there's an S there. After Lyst, and I got the sort of awareness of the Lyst job again through someone I had met at Rent the Runway. He sent me the job listing when I kind of put out to him that I was interested in finding something new. I wanted more operational experience. And when I was ready to leave Lyst, I sent out an email to my network, and some of you guys posted questions about like how to make an ask, and we can talk about that later. But I sent out emails to my network, and I kind of had a goal of sending out like a couple emails every day and starting with like folks who I knew were, friends of mine who I knew would help me out to make it easier. But through that, I was connected with a serial entrepreneur who had developed this mass customization technology. I was really intrigued. At the time, I had just gotten married, was interested in having a child in the next year. So working at a 2-person startup was not exactly the wisest choice, but it just felt like something I couldn't not do. And at that time, while we were raising money for the company, one of the strategic investors for the company actually purchased the company outright, which was both amazing and complicated. So, amazing because I think fundraising is really hard, especially when you have really young children. Really hard because it was an acqui-hire situation. So I ended up sort of being a mid-level manager at a large corporation, which is not what I had intended to do. Yada, yada, yada. Let me think what happens next. Wound down that company last year. Oh, and by the way, just like to talk about timing and coincidence, we signed the stock purchase agreement for that company 10 days after my first daughter was born. And I signed my employment agreement at my current company about a month before my second daughter was born. So at least in my life, like family things and work things have always peaked at the same moments. And I'm sure for moms or people who are thinking of it on the line, you'll find that to be true as well. Everything always happens at once. And as for Llewellyn, I also came to this opportunity through my network. So a dear friend of mine who I met in business school had started a holding company in the hemp-based cannabis space. He knew that I had experience building beauty brands and working in consumer products. So I initially joined as an advisor, and I fell in love with cannabis. I fell in love with CBD, and have always been personally really interested in wellness, and made the transition to full-time after 6 months of advising. Sorry, Nicole, that was extremely long-winded.
No, but I think it's great to tell these stories because so many times we see successful people, and especially successful women with families, and we're like, how do you do all of that, right? And I feel like a lot of times we get into this place, and maybe I'm just speaking for myself and kind of what I've seen, but where we feel like, one, it's super unachievable, and two, it's kind of got to be this career ladder instead of career lattice, right? Instead of moving across the board, instead of moving up. And so I'm thankful that you shared that. And I think you have an incredible story. I mean, Rent the Runway is incredible, and just all of these connections that you've been able to build, kind of when you least expected them. And so thank you for sharing all of that. And we had some comments in there from people saying that the goal of going to Harvard, that's classic Asian mom goals. And somebody else.
Zillion percent.
So that was funny, but I'm really excited to dive into some of these tips that you have set up for us before we dive into the questions. And I know we've had more people join, so I just want to shout out, if you have any questions, please feel free, to come off of mute, right in the chat, really whatever. We want this to be as engaging as possible for you. But with that, Chandita, I'm going to go to the next slide where you have some tips for us. And so I'm going to let you take it away from here, and I'm going to go on mute.
Yeah, for sure. So, the idea, I wanted to just introduce this idea of the emotional bank account. So the concept was coined by Stephen Covey, who is the author of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And the idea of an emotional bank account, it's a metaphor. So imagine that with every person they hold an account at your bank, and you hold an account at their bank. And like any bank account, there's 2 sides. There's a withdrawal and a deposit, but it's not monetary. It's acts of goodwill to kind of build up the balance in that emotional bank account. And the way I think of it is, in order to make a withdrawal, you definitely need to have a good credit limit, and you need to have a high balance in that other person's emotional bank account. And just examples of ways to make deposits. I think, in our personal lives, I know you guys can all think of hundreds of them, because we do it very instinctively, right? So just acts of caring, acts of respect. In a, more business context, it might be something as small as sending the person an article or something they might find helpful. Helping the person when they need support. So sometimes, people send out a request to fill out a survey for a new business they're launching, or they send out an email saying, like, I just launched this new business, helping them at that time, like doing that survey, reposting their success on LinkedIn, whatever it is, supporting on social channels, et cetera. There's a lot more examples I'll give as we go on, but I just wanted to begin by introducing this idea of the emotional bank account. And then we can go, I think, to the next slide, Nicole. So tip number 1 is with an emotional bank account is you got to make deposits without a goal in mind. So, it doesn't sort of work to say like, okay, I want to ask that person for a favor. So like, I'll butter them up with like asking a couple questions about like their life in one email and then reach out again a week later with the ask, right? You kind of have to build the balance over time and you play the long game. So for some people, you might make deposits and you never make the withdrawal. But in many occasions, if you kind of make those deposits over years, when it comes time for your ask, they will be kind of really trying to be there for you. The other thing I think is always great is if there's a win-win scenario. So if you can help two people in your network at the same time. So one example of that is something I call growing the pie. So, if you think of a pie and you're cutting slices of the pie, the metaphor of a pie implies that if one person gets a slice, there's less for everyone else. But if you grow the pie, then you're actually creating more pie for everyone. And a simple example of that is, sometimes a recruiter will reach out to me for a role. And almost always I will say like, if I'm not interested, I'll say like, okay, can I send some people your way, and try to send it out to folks who I know who are in the market looking for a job. Or, connecting two people who might have a good kind of partnership opportunity with each other or what have you. Connecting people to potential investors, those sorts of things are ways to grow the pie where you're helping both people in the introduction.
And I just wanted to chime in here. I like something that you said about you don't always end up making deposits or withdrawals on those deposits, right? But playing the long game, you may make a withdrawal beyond that, right? Like on a secondary account, to put it in terms of money, right? Because they might have somebody who they can, as you're saying, refer you to. So it might not be directly from their emotional bank account, but maybe from somebody else's bank account.
Absolutely. Asking for an introduction to someone else, I think, is one of both the biggest asks and one of the most valuable asks out there, whether it's someone referring you for a job, referring you to an investor. One of the questions that came through was like, have I asked for referrals for non-work related things as well? And I have. I put, when I was in my 20s and working at Rent the Runway, I had just had a breakup and I kind of let everyone know that I was on the market. And one of my colleagues actually set me up with the person I ended up marrying. So, and this was not even someone like who I was super close with at the time, obviously now a very close friend. But point being that those kind of requests for an introduction to the secondary person is tremendous.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that.
This one is a little non-intuitive. So I think that there's a lot made of like how you network like up, so people talk a lot about like finding the right mentors and, getting connected with high power people. One of the things that's been most valuable for me has been networking with peers and even with folks who reported to me. And I think, when you're coming up in your career, that's like something that's sort of easier to do because you're all kind of at the same level and can support each other, and there isn't that power asymmetry. Or even when you're senior to someone, you can give a little of your time to help them with their job search. Or I always had interns, and now as I am nearly 40, my interns have started companies. My former people who worked for me have made introductions for me, and some of those kind of peer and junior folks that I've built up credit in their emotional bank account have been the most valuable folks of all. So it's a little non-intuitive, but I think cultivating your account like in a 360 degree, cultivating your network 360 degrees is very important. And then this one, my last tip is just be specific with your ask. So this is kind of on two levels. I think one is to put your ask out to the universe, right? So I gave a couple examples from my life, I was joking with you guys when when I said like my mom said go to Harvard, because she did say that. And of course it's a ridiculous thing for a mom to say to a first grader, but it did put sort of a very specific goal in my mind at a young age. Or kind of putting out to the universe, like, I want to make a change in a role. Someone had put in a question about um, they want to change their role, maybe not right now, but in 6 months or 12 months, and kind of what to do. And I think just even changing your mindset and like asking, not to be all woo woo, but asking the universe for what you want opens you up to the opportunities that are probably around you at all times. Um, and it also, just by communicating that like to the close people around you, when they hear of the right opportunity for you, they'll be like, oh, I remember she said she wanted XYZ thing, and think of you. So kind of putting your ask out there is important. And then also just tactically, if you are reaching out to someone with a specific ask, let's say you want an intro to someone for a job you're applying to. I think at least in my experience, the best thing to do is to get right out there and sort of say like, hey, do you think you could, introduce me to so-and-so for this job? And, put the link in for the job, put your bio in the email, put a link to your LinkedIn, put your resume, sort of get right out there and make it easy for that person to do you that favor. I think, out of politeness, sometimes people say like, hey, could I take you to coffee, or could I do like an informational chat? And I have found that especially if you're dealing with someone who's super busy, the best thing to do is to be really specific about what you want and make it super easy for them to just, like hit forward and send it along.
I love this tip. I find myself being one of those types of people who is very like, I love talking to people, but I really hate small talk. So when people like want to grab a coffee, I love that, but I need to also know what's the purpose in this, right? And I'm not even, I mean, I'm busy, but I'm not as busy as some other people, founding businesses and other things that they have going on, and not even talking about homeschooling, or virtual learning now. But I really love that tip, because I think sometimes we start thinking about referrals and asking for introductions, and we're like, well, we better set a good stage so that they feel welcome to do it, right? But sometimes people just want to know, what do you want from me at the end of the day, without, being rude, of course, but what do you want from me and how can I help you?
Totally. Well, someone had put a question in about sort of feeling awkward about asking for things, which I totally get, right? But the thing to remember in that scenario is that when you're asking for something, like, remember that you're bringing something to the table too. So when you're asking for someone to refer you to a role, if that person brokers that connection and you end up getting hired, like, they did something to help their connect too, right? So I think it's important, like in that scenario, you are actually helping them make a deposit in the other person's emotional bank account, potentially, if you're a good fit for the role. If you're sort of like, oh, can you introduce me to so and so high level VC for an informational conversation? That's like asking for a lot in a way that like may or may not be beneficial for the person who you're asking it from. So I think like try to structure those asks in a way where you clearly can understand the value that you're bringing to the table. And I think that will help with both confidence and making the other person feel like, okay, great, I'm doing something that's good for everybody.
I love it. And also, I'm a big fan now of putting things out into the universe and speaking things into existence, because it's amazing how those things work out. And so we've got some people commenting that, yeah, you got to trust the universe, and that asking the universe for what you want is really what you have to do. And I'm a firm believer in that now. Just saying those things over and over and over again out loud in your mind, and really, envisioning those things, I think is the best way to hopefully achieve them. So thank you for sharing all of that, Chandita. I'm so happy that you shared all of that and kicked us off here, because I think the best thing about these chat and learns is being able to share those details and those actionable steps to reach those goals. And so here for everyone on the line, these are some of the pre-submitted questions that we have. But again, if you see one of your questions towards the end or you don't see your question on here, please feel free to jump in the chat and ask. We really want to make this time about you. But kicking us off in the meantime, until somebody has a question, let's start with the first one. So, Chandita, what are some ways your story or your path has catapulted you or hindered you? And I know you talked about this a lot, but I don't know if there's a particular moment that comes to mind when you hear this question.
Well, I think when I was young, I definitely had a lot of my personal momentum was provided through like my family and this sort of immigrant experience and trying to like be successful for them, which like for me personally was amazing at a younger age. So in that way I would say like and kind of having access to those networks through my education has been really powerful. And I don't think I would have gotten there on my own without like my mom really being like the wind beneath my wings there. So that definitely my sort of experience as a first generation immigrant definitely helped catapult me. With that said, I think like as things have changed so much in the 20 years since I graduated college. So when I graduated, half our class was going into like finance or consulting or with the hope of going to law school. And, people nowadays are not taking such linear paths, right? And so creativity and figuring out what drives you is so much more important. And I think that, it took me a really long time to figure out my compass as it related to that because it just wasn't something I cultivated younger. So kind of figuring out like what I liked was just really not a part of my experience until I would say like my mid 20s. And so it's still taken me a while, and I still have to like do, I think, a little more work sometimes to figure out like what's the right decision for me, just because that wasn't like one of the top questions I asked when I was growing up.
I love it. Thank you for sharing that. And I always love when people come on here and share, vulnerable stories about themselves because things aren't always, rainbows and butterflies. So it's always important, I think, to share some of the not so positive things and things that we have to work on, especially as successful people. You have to share those stories because we see too many of those stories that are like, oh, look at all these great things that happened to me. And it was work, but nobody ever goes into the details of the obstacles you may have had to overcome emotionally or in the other sense. So thank you.
I mean, and I know even the way I laid out my story, it sounded pretty like linear and up and to the right, but that has not been the experience. There have definitely been many stumbles, many things that felt sort of lateral. And one of the things that's like very heartening for me is, you know, during my MBA, you had a lot of these entrepreneurs who came back and kind of shared their stories, and a lot of them didn't hit their stride or their like kind of big success that they were known for till their 50s or 60s, and I think when you're sort of starting out in your career, you're in your 20s, your 30s, even your early 40s, you kind of feel like, okay, I shouldn't have made it yet, or and the truth is, like, a lot of people don't peak, or not that it's even about peaking, but a lot of people don't hit that stride till later, and that's perfectly fine, right? There's great things ahead. So kind of just breathing into the process and having patience with where you're at, because it's not up and to the right for anybody.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Thank you for bringing that up, especially this day and age with so much social media and LinkedIn and looking at how everyone typically shares their successes, right? And it can make you feel inferior, especially because, typically on LinkedIn, you're connecting with people in your network that are in similar industries. And so how we compare ourselves. And I think that's so important that you mentioned that, especially talking about the long game, right? Because I think sometimes when we think of networking and asking for referrals and introductions, we expect things to happen overnight. We expect to like land our next big position tomorrow, when sometimes it's a game of, a year, 2 years. Unfortunately, sometimes that's just how it works out. So thank you for sharing all of that and touching upon that. And I had a question that came in and I wanted to ask you. So, how does one find a mentor? And could you share your journey on how you went along to find mentors and sponsors?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the industries, it's funny, like the industries I've worked in since I got my MBA, I've had like bosses who oftentimes were my age or even younger. So, sort of the first 10 years of my career, I had folks who were like distinctly senior to me. And I worked in organizations where there was more hierarchy and this kind of like, okay, that person could be my mentor. Since then, working in startups, which are especially like sort of pre-series B, quite much flatter, there haven't been as many, like there hasn't been as much of a natural hierarchy within the organizations that I'm in. I think with myself and mentors, I have had the best luck when it is someone who I have had an opportunity to do some kind of work with. And we have just gelled personally, or we've done good work together. So I would say 90% of the time when I've had a mentor, it's someone who I've had the chance to kind of interact with repeatedly. I haven't personally had as much experience kind of reaching out to someone blind to ask them for that support. One thing I would say is that I think it's easier to connect with mentors at certain stages, certain periods of time. And during that time, you want to really try and take advantage of it. So, as an example, I think I'll give the example if any of you guys are considering going back to school. When you're in school, that is a great time to reach out to people who are potential mentors in the industries you want to be in. Folks are much more open to that. Or let's say you are looking for, let's say you're at a startup and you're looking for folks who could potentially be an advisor to the company, so you're bringing something to them as well, the opportunity to have this like advisorship role. That I have found is like a great time to bring in a mentor again. So sorry, these are not really crisp pieces of advice in terms of finding a mentor, but I think it's something that has to come organically. And I've had the best experience when it's someone that I've really known in real life.
Thank you for that tip. And I just want to shout out that we do have a chat and learn that we did about how to find a mentor. And so you can find that on Power to Fly. And I think we did it last week, actually.
Hopefully that person is a lot more crisp.
She actually she's a director of mentorship at Power to Fly. And so she's been building out this whole program. But to Hoshita, who asked the question, I am right there as well. And I'm having trouble with it too. So I'm trying to overcome my own barriers here.
I will say, folks who have reported to me have cultivated me as a mentor. And one of the things I appreciate is just like a quarterly check-in, where they just like update me on what they're up to. And I think that that's just a great way to stay in touch with like a former boss. And a former boss is also who likes you, is also someone who's very likely to introduce you to a potential mentor, because again, very high emotional bank account balance, assuming you guys had a good relationship. So I think like staying in touch with all your former bosses is a great way to try to build your kind of network of senior folks.
I love it. Thank you so much. All right. So now moving on to the next question. You already talked about this, so I'm going to go ahead and skip this one. All right, perfect. So how have new career opportunities come your way? Do you feel you have had a lot of good options to choose from, or have you intentionally cultivated new paths?
Good question. I would say I came out of school during two recessions, in both 2003 and 2009. And so both times it wasn't sort of the like smorgasbord of job options that I might have dreamt of. And in fact, both times I ended up with only one opportunity, but it ended up really being the one that I had been cultivating in my mind from the get-go. So I don't necessarily think like volume of options is as important as kind of, I think having a ton of conversations is super important, and kind of letting your gut guide you towards the right thing. And if only one thing comes through or two things come through, what have you, I think that's fine. I think you can kind of do a lot of the research work at the top of the funnel when you're figuring out what you might be interested in, rather than necessarily feeling like you need to get, six offers before making a choice. Because a lot of times, as we're thinking about changing jobs and we're more senior in our careers too, we're doing things that are more opportunistic, right? So it's not per se that we're thinking like, okay, I must change my job and now I'm going to apply to 40 and hopefully 5 will work out. You're more like, okay, I think it might be time for the next step. I want to learn something new. I want to shift industries, etc. And you kind of take that path to find what that right opportunity is. So I definitely feel like that is more the experience as you get senior. And in terms of like great options versus intentionally cultivating new paths, this answer for me, the last two roles I've done have been sort of, I've started my own business. That's not to say that there weren't kind of opportunities out there at existing businesses. It was more that I really wanted to, I had something I was very passionate about and felt like I had the tools in my toolkit to do it successfully. Now, both times I did work with partners who have supported on the fundraising side, because I think for an entrepreneur, that can be one of the most time consuming and distracting elements of running a business. It can take up 80% of your time. So those are kind of, that's sort of an alternative path towards doing like a sole proprietorship, is where you find a model where whether you're an EIR or sitting within a larger company, or in the example I gave with my beauty company, you find a strategic investor. So you kind of reduce the risk a little bit for yourself. So those were structures I definitely kind of cultivated personally, just because the stage of life I was at, that felt like the sweet spot.
Perfect. Thank you for chiming in there. And so, what is the best career move that has happened due to leveraging your network? And actually, I want to add on here. And how did you leverage your network to get to that opportunity?
Oh gosh. I mean, I feel like almost every example I gave you guys of making a shift was the result of leveraging my network and leveraging like an introduction from someone I knew to the thing I wanted to do. I would say the opportunity at Rent the Runway was probably the most significant. Reason being that I think career changes from industry to industry, or like even role to role, I think are really tricky, because there's definitely like a benefit of doubt, sort of a benefit of proof. So let's say you have one role and you want to do a new role and you're just submitting your resume or your LinkedIn, people might say, oh, that person doesn't have the right background. But if you're leveraging your network and the person knows you and knows that you have what it takes to figure out this new role, that's kind of the way to cross the chasm, right? To get from where you are to where you want to be. So like, I think in particular, when you're trying to make that kind of pivot, that's where leveraging your network is most important, because you'll have a chance to get opportunities that you might not get if you were approaching the role, approaching the job sort of anonymously, if that makes sense. So in the example of Rent the Runway, I had been a management consultant, then I had worked in retail. And one of the beautiful things about working at a startup that's sub 20 people is everyone gets to do everything because there's too much to do. So you get to do things that you're not, qualified to do, or that no large company would let you do. But after a year of doing it, like, guess what? All of a sudden, like, you're kind of an expert in how to do it, right? At least that's how it works in the startup world, where things are moving so fast. And expertise, like the kind of life, the life cycle of becoming an expert in something is much protracted from what it used to be 20 years ago. So that's where I think if you're trying to make a change, leveraging your network is like most valuable in that situation versus a linear kind of role progression in a thing you've already been doing.
Yes, I love this. I love this. Thank you so much. And I see that Devney wants to ask a question. So please come off of mute and ask your question.
Hi, thank you so much. I just want to say that, you know, your career, the path that you've been describing is super inspirational, and it kind of sounds almost like magic. Like, you know, you just happen to meet somebody for coffee and then they happen to say like, oh, I have this, you know, role for you. I guess I'm wondering, do you have any suggestions for when that's like not happening and how to not get discouraged when you're doing all the right things and you're getting passed over for jobs because you're making a career shift and you don't have the same experience as the other candidates? Just any ideas so you don't get defeated?
I think that one of the, and Devney, thank you for asking that question. And I've certainly, you know, had that experience before as well. You know, what I didn't include in the story is like, you know, applying to tons of roles that I didn't get, right? And I sort of mentioned it briefly, but you know, there have been many roles along the way that I've applied to and felt very discouraged when it didn't work out. But you know, I have found that like whether it's the one role out of the 50 you apply to, if you kind of have your goal in mind as you're going through it, ultimately, hopefully, it will be the right one for you, and often not in the timing or time frame that you'd like. One thing I find valuable when I'm kind of launching into a search like this for a new role is to really start with close contacts first. So, you know, I'd sort of mentioned cultivating your network like at your own peer level or even folks who are junior to you. So I think, you know, when I've started the search, it's kind of been even like setting a goal of reaching out to 2 people a day. And I think, you know, I can kind of share with you how what I say when I've reached out to people like that, but presenting it as like, presenting it as something kind of like low obligation for them. So basically saying like, here's an update. You know, I've been doing XYZ for the last couple of years. I'm thinking about making a move. I want to give myself a little time to search, or, you know, whatever the scenario might be. If you're between roles and you're kind of out there having exploratory conversations, and say, these are the types of roles I'm interested in, boom, boom, boom. And, you know, do you have any ideas for me? And let that first person you reach out to kind of be a sure thing. You know, let it be someone who will kind of come back to you with an idea or two, because I think that helps build confidence, and that will kind of grow the network of people you can speak to. Hopefully, if not exponentially, it'll at least kind of double each time. So I think my salient piece of advice there is to really try to network at your level and get some of those early wins of good conversations. The other thing I might suggest is, I know you mentioned sort of not having the right experience. Sometimes, at least in my history, I've been able to get the right experience when I've kind of gone to a slightly smaller company. Reason being that, you know, at smaller companies, there is like kind of this tendency towards scope creep, and someone might get hired for role A, but also take on role B. And so let's say you're been doing a marketing role, but you want to get into product management. That's like a hard jump to do between companies. But if you go to a smaller company where you say, look, this is what I can do, but this is what I would like to do. Can I do that as well as my job? There's more of an opportunity to kind of pick up some projects or do some work in that space. And then as you're crafting your story for the next move, you have that experience to speak to. So I know none of those are like immediately actionable, other than the kind of reaching out to someone at your level. But I have had a lot of success kind of starting at the smaller company to build your credibility, and then being able to take that to somewhere that maybe has a more built out organization in the function you're trying to get into.
Thank you so much. Those are great ideas.
Good luck.
And thank you, Devaney, for coming off of mute. And I want to tackle something on to that. So somebody who's in a career switch, probably has a different network than the network that they're trying to get into. So if you're applying to a small company and trying to get into that network and build those connections, should you directly message recruiters? And I don't know if you feel this is necessarily an appropriate question for you specifically, but should they reach out to recruiters, or should you start to reach out to influential people on LinkedIn? Where should you kind of start that to build that network?
Yeah, it's a great question. Sorry, I'm just reading the question from Lisa. So I think recruiters can be super helpful. And again, this is like one of those long game examples. So there might be times where you're happy in your role and a recruiter reaches out to you and maybe you just ignore their message, right? I think I always take the time to write back if someone's reached out to me to say, hey, like this is not the right opportunity for me, but maybe I could send some folks your way, or like this is not for me, but here's things I am looking for, and just you might want to call upon that person like years later. So I think, and recruiters tend to be pretty aggressive on LinkedIn. So I think like I find that those are kind of like low hanging fruit in terms of just adding recruiters to your network. And then when you are looking, circling back to them. So I think recruiters for sure. In terms of like building a network by kind of cold reaching out to people, I think it can be tricky, especially if you're reaching out for sort of informational conversations. I think people tend to be, resistant to someone who's new to them on LinkedIn. I think the one way to do it is to send a great message that kind of explains what you're asking for. And again, think about the kind of withdrawal versus deposit metaphor. So in that example, there's no balance at this bank. So perhaps instead of asking for like an informational conversation, you might even say to them, like, here's a role I'm interested in at your company. Would you consider like, do you think I'd be a good fit? Do you think you could talk to me about it? So I would kind of get specific. And then I know COVID is a hard time to do this, but one of the best ways to network is to be a member of organizations like Power to Fly, to participate in like live networking events. And once again, network at your level, because it's a great way to kind of build relationships in the industries and companies you're interested in. And through there, now all of a sudden you're 1 degree of separation from the key decision maker.
I love it. That's really helpful, actually, because I think that can get really tricky too when you're trying to like pivot into a new industry and you're like, well, I know no one, so how am I going to get to know people? But I think that was really helpful. And I think LinkedIn is a really awesome tool because it allows you to connect with people there as well, right? Commenting and liking posts. And luckily, usually the most popular posts tend to get lots of traction. So I really appreciate you sharing that and sharing your tips. And then a question came in from Lisa that I wanted to ask you. So how do you ask someone on LinkedIn that you just connected with for some insights, or how to build a relationship in this type of network forum? Do you have any suggestions?
I think it depends on what kind of insights you're reaching out for. So I think if it's like personal insights on your own like career path, I think that's probably like the trickiest like first lead to ask for. I think if it's something like partnership related, like your company and their company, or you're bringing an opportunity to them or something like that, something where you can like present it as value to them. I've had good success with kind of cold reach outs for that sort of opportunity where you say like, I want to talk to you about, in the example of Loeli, I had been looking up a bunch of folks on LinkedIn who were potential partners. And I saw that there was this one guy named Scott who was connected to all of them. Literally like 30 people I looked up, and this was the one guy in common. So I was like, okay, I just need to talk to this guy directly. And he was one of these people we had connected on LinkedIn, but I didn't know him. I don't know if you guys have folks like that in your network where you connected and you're like, have I ever met you before? So I reached out to him and I said, like, you're very you're very popular on LinkedIn. We know so many people in common. Like, can we just talk about potential opportunities to collaborate or something like that? And then that got a follow-up, and we ended up, meeting in real life, and connecting over that. So I feel like, in summary, I think a request just for something for yourself is a hard thing to ask for as your first reach out to someone. Again, the exception being unless you can present it as something that's of value to them as well. So if it's, let's say, there's a specific role at their company you're interested in, or they are connected to a specific person who is hiring for a specific role, that can be presented as something that you're bringing a value to the table because you're of value, right? And if they broker that connection, then that's good for them too.
Oh, yes. We are such selfish beings sometimes, right? I feel like, and the busier you are, the more selfish you have to get with your time and, putting those boundaries up and those priorities. And so, I both love and hate what you're saying. I love that it's the truth and it's, you have to provide some kind of value add, but also I hate it because we're just so selfish. I wish we all had all and never ending time bank, but time is the enemy of us all, unfortunately.
Well, I find a lot of times as well, when someone junior reaches out, a lot of times I'll get stuff for like informational conversations, this, that, and the other. And what I try to do is just get right to the chase and just kind of say, like, is there some, like, ask them what the specific thing is that I can help them with. And oftentimes when you open it up, the person says, okay, well, I'm actually just want an intro to this person, or, they'll kind of put the ask out there, and then you've still kind of done that favor and helped them along their way, but in a way that's more respectful of their time. The other day, I was like reminded again about sort of the value of this like 360-degree networking, because years ago, a friend had asked me to speak to a girl he worked with at his consulting firm, and she wanted to leave consulting and move on into startups. And I was working at startups at the time. I was getting a lot of people reaching out because they were interested in kind of fashion tech. And as you said, Nicole, I was feeling really overwhelmed with work. I had gotten a lot of these like inquiries. And so I sort of said, like, I'm sorry, I really can't right now, like, apologies. And then years later, flash forward, she's a VC. And the other day she forwarded me the email that this guy had forwarded her, where I had said I was too busy to talk to her. And not in a mean-spirited way, just like, oh my God, I can't believe we actually could have connected 10 years ago instead of today. I guess she had been looking up my email address in her Gmail. But point being, I was kicking myself because I was like, oh, so I think I guess what I've learned is try to do the favor, even if it's someone, junior, and even if it's like the 10th request you've gotten, try and find some small way to accommodate them. I could give other examples of this, but like many times in the past, it's even been someone who's been younger than me or worked for me who's kind of helped me figure something out in the future.
I love that reminder, and I love the way that we turned it into a positive thing at the end, because it's just so true. It's so true. Even when you're feeling overwhelmed, it is so important to foment these connections, even though you've got a million things going on, and sometimes it's just easier to say no. But you never know what can come from these connections and from people you're talking to, and
helping people in their time of need is like a multiplier on the deposit. Does that make sense? So recently I had sent an email out to my network telling them about Lowelly, which is delicious water soluble CBD drinks, and saying like, I would love if you guys tried it, etc. And let's say 50 people tried it, and it wasn't even necessarily the people I'm closest to, but like I know who all those 50 people are, and I am forever grateful to them. And they bought my loyalty with $10. But no, the point being is that if you show up for someone in their time of need, it really is multiplicative. So like, try to just kind of be there, and I think if it comes from a good place, it will pay itself back to you.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. And so, Chandita, I know that we're coming up on time, which makes me very sad because I wish we could keep talking, but I really want to leave time for you to tell us a little bit about how you got into CBD wellness, especially from everything that you had previously been doing. And tell us a little bit about Llewellyn, how we can find out more information, how we can be one of those 50 people to support you. Or now 50 to 100 people.
I'll also say, like, having said everything I just said, everyone should feel free to just connect on LinkedIn. And if there is something I can do to help any of you who are on this call today, I'd be happy to do it. Just let me know that you were on this Power to Fly, so I know how we're connected. And then to your question about Llewellyn, I've been really passionate about holistic wellness, like in my personal life, just dealing with some health issues of my own over the last 10 years. And a friend of mine had started a company in the hemp-based cannabis space and was looking for someone to run the B2C end of his business. And as I mentioned, I'd sort of started consulting and then joined full time. And the idea behind Llewellyn is, what I've learned about cannabinoids is that they occur naturally in our body. So we, within our own bodies, have something called the endocannabinoid system. Over time, our cannabinoid levels drop. So when you take a substance like CBD, which is called a phytocannabinoid because it exists in plants, it's replenishing something that was in our body that's missing. So think of it like how you would take calcium to address osteoporosis before it happens. Taking something like CBD is really preventative, and it's an anti-aging measure because it reduces overall inflammation in your body. So I find, like, a lot of us kind of might read things like Goop or Well and Good and be like, yeah, I want to do this, that, and the other. But like reality sets in, and where's the time and where's the resources? So the idea behind Llewellyn, which stands for Life Well Lived, is that you can build a foundation for lifelong health with something that takes 60 seconds and costs $2. So it's really meant to make kind of wellness, take it from something that's like big and intimidating into something that's really bite-sized and achievable. And that's what it's all about. And I would love if you guys wanted to try it. We, one of the things we aim to do is make it CBD for CBD virgins. So our starter pack is only $10.
I love it. I love it. And I love the way that's packaged because I am a CBD virgin. So thank you for thinking of me and thinking of the other people who may be new to CBD and have heard so much about it, but are really unsure about it. So I just want to thank you so much for your time today, Chandita. It has been so amazing. I have loved talking to you. You have so much insights, and I really wish, oh my gosh, I know we have tons more to get through. So I'm sure we'll have you back so that you can spread some more insights and get to the rest of these questions. But until then, I want to say thank you to you. Thank you to everyone on the line here today for being with us live streaming, wherever you are. It's really fantastic to have you. And so, Chandita, with that, I will let you send us out today.
That sounds great. Guys, thank you so much for your time. I hope you got something out of it, and seriously, don't hesitate to connect and let me know how I can help you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. Have an awesome day and a non-2020 day. And we're almost at the end of the week, so it is to celebrate today.